Hey everybody, it is Wednesday, December 4th, 2024. As we start to close out the year here on the Mo News Podcast, I'm Moshe Winunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to, and officially give you permission to now respond to all incoming business emails with, let's circle back after the new year.
I posted a meme that had that the Wednesday of Thanksgiving, because that was sort of my deadline for like, if we haven't addressed it yet, it's going to just have to wait until after New Year's.
At this point in like the post-COVID world, etc., like people working remotely, it's not even that you can get work done like the first week of December, second week of December. I'm already getting, the replies being like, let's talk in January.
I'm totally okay with it, by the way.
We're taking 6 weeks of vacation at the end of the year.
Listen, Europeans basically take the entire month of August off. So we'll take December. That's just what we're going to do.
Listen, I think you see this pushback from a lot of Americans because we get so little vacation time compared to our colleagues around the world. And by the way, Americans, even the vacation time we do get, we don't take, which is a larger cultural issue. So I think there is a reckoning that is happening here. And we can give some credit to the Gen Zers in the workforce who are like, I'm taking my time plus.
Okay, but we are working, Moshe. So
we are
here. We're here basically for the rest of the month.
Elder millennials, we work up until Christmas Eve.
Okay, so with that, let's get to some headlines. Political chaos in South Korea, why the president called for martial law, and then hours later lifted the order. What is happening?
We'll try to bring you the latest here as developments change by the hour.
Back here at home, a huge case at the Supreme Court today over transgender rights. Back overseas, President Biden arrives in Angola on his only trip as president to Sub-Saharan Africa. But Moshe, the trip being overshadowed by his controversial decision to pardon his son Hunter.
And he's been trailed by reporters at every stop saying, "Why did you pardon him? Why did you pardon him?" And he just keeps smiling back at the reporters.
I can't hear you. What?
Yeah. His response to one of them was, "Welcome to America." Don't know what to make of that.
Meanwhile, a Chinese hack of U.S. telecom companies is still ongoing. So who are they spying on, and why the U.S. government hasn't been able to kick the hackers out of the system? Moshe, it's been months.
And what, if anything, you might be able to do to ensure that your information stays secure?
Kate Middleton making a rare public appearance since announcing her cancer diagnosis. To business news, Frontier Airlines is making a play for high-paying flyers with first class.
Frontier hoping that it'll get some of you to consider flying with them in the future.
And it's only 2024. Yes, it's the end of 2024, but Billboard has picked the greatest pop singer of the 21st century. So Moshe, they are ready to make that call, and I can tell you it is one of these three women: Taylor Swift, Lady Gaga, or Beyonce.
So we'll get to the answer at the end, and we'll also get to my rant on why in 2024 we're already declaring the best singer of the century with 75 more years to go. Jill, I tried to research who could have been named this in 1924. You'll have the results of my research at the end of this podcast.
It does feel a bit premature.
Right, like by 1924, like we had never heard of like Elvis or the Beatles, etc. Anyway, we'll talk about this.
Okay, and Moshe has on this day in history.
Jill, a big anniversary for one of the biggest names in fast food in American history, what they initially sold their hamburgers for when they first opened up.
It's going to be like a nickel, and we're going to just hate ourselves. But I look forward to that, Moshe.
That's what we do here. That's what we do best.
Okay, let's start overseas in South Korea, which is now in a state of complete political chaos. South Korea, one of our key democratic allies in Asia. Late Tuesday, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law in an unscheduled televised address. The announcement of military rule sparked demonstrations in Seoul, including outside the country's National Assembly. Nearly 200 legislators were able to make their way into the National Assembly, which is the country's parliament, and about 2.5 hours later voted unanimously to rescind martial law. And that included, by the way, members of the president's own party. Accordingly, just hours later, President Yoon said that he would lift martial law. But what is this all about? Yoon is extremely unpopular in South Korea. Moshe has about a 20 to 30% approval rating, which is even lower than the politicians here in the United States.
Yeah, it's like Congress. Basically, that's approval level here in Congress. But for Yoon, it's notable he's only been the leader there for just over 2 years.
So he said he wanted to eliminate what he called anti-state forces as he struggles against an opposition party that won a majority in the country's parliament earlier this year. There is a divisive fight over spending when it comes to the government budget. Yoon has gone so far as to accuse the opposition party of sympathizing with communist North Korea. But still, this is all extremely surprising. We haven't seen anything like this in South Korea since the early 1980s, when South Korea had a string of authoritarian leaders. But since then, it has been a very stable democracy.
Yeah, I didn't have South Korea going authoritarian for a few hours on my 2024 bingo card, at least what's left of the 2024 card here. And yet, here we are. We should note this is particularly significant for America. We have about 30,000 troops based in South Korea. It is a key U.S. ally, as you mentioned, especially as we continue to face the threat of North Korea there. President Yoon apparently surprising members of even his own party with a late night move, and then parliamentarians making their way around special forces and troops that were then stationed breaking windows into the nation's parliament. It appears the military there was confused as to what to do because they haven't seen this since the 1970s. So a bunch of young guys in the military saying, the martial law, like, what do we do in this situation? Because also Yoon wasn't clear as to what he meant by martial law, whether they actually needed to stop all protests, cut off media reports, cut off the parliament. Ultimately here, parliamentarians, the majority of the parliament making their way in late night there. Typically when you declare martial law, you prevent all of that stuff from happening. So sort of a haphazard martial law declaration here. And so parliament members get in there. You have members of his own party being like, what is going on here? So the unanimous 190-0 vote. And then ultimately you have Yoon saying, you got me. That's the rule. So martial law now over here in South Korea, just a few hours after I declared it, because of course the law in South Korea says that once parliament ends it, or if they say that there can't be martial law, then the president has to respond to that. Again, not the typical approach of a would-be authoritarian who is looking to install military rule there. We should note Yoon doesn't have experience in the military, not seen as like a former general that the military would then respond to, putting tanks in the streets and ensuring that they get to stay in power. You had military facing off against protesters, sort of just standing there for the most part as people were yelling, end martial law now, again, within an hour of him declaring it. So there was just a lot of confusion among the military, among national security leaders, among the police force, and among members of Yoon's own party. And so ultimately, Yoon, as you said, pretty unpopular. 2.5 years into his 5-year term. They have 1 5-year term for presidents there in South Korea. He's been in a standoff with the opposition, facing impeachment of his cabinet members. Even his wife is involved in a scandal here in South Korea due to a gift of a Dior bag that she got. So that's been scandalous in South Korea as well. So the whole family under investigation. Now, South Korea been pretty stable democratically, but they have impeached a couple presidents in the past 20 years. They impeached the president, Roh Moo-hyun, in 2004, and then another president in 2017. So it remains to be seen what this means moving forward here for the system there in South Korea. You do have unpredictable Kim Jong-un over the border there in North Korea, who is feeling stronger of late with Russian support. You got the Chinese looking at potentially invading Taiwan here in the next couple of years. Japan concerned about it all. And so Asia requires watching here. Again, even geopolitical experts surprised with the headlines they saw there on Tuesday morning, but just speaks to not taking anything for granted globally right now. A lot of instability out there, leaders stretching what they might be able to get away with as you continue to see, everything from here in the U.S. to Brazil to countries in Europe experiencing more instability than we have seen in recent decades.
Okay, back here at home, one of the biggest cases of the term goes before the U.S. Supreme Court today. The justices are set to hear arguments on whether states can stop doctors from prescribing gender-affirming care to minors. We're talking about things like puberty blockers and hormone therapy. This case stems from a 2023 Tennessee law that enacts civil penalties for doctors who provide such care, even with parental consent. 3 transgender youths from Tennessee, along with their parents and a Memphis doctor, are suing the state The Biden administration joined the suit. Representing the families is ACLU attorney Chase Strangio. He is set to become the first openly transgender lawyer to argue a case before the nation's highest court. He recently said that, quote, "It is not lost on me that I will be standing there at the lectern at the Supreme Court, in part because I was able to have access to the medical care that is the very subject of the case that we're litigating."
On the other side is the Tennessee Attorney General, who argues that the law ensures minors do not receive treatments until they can understand the lifelong consequences or until the science is developed to the point that Tennessee might take a different view of their efficacy. Under consideration is whether blocking care for transgender youth violates the 14th Amendment, which prohibits discrimination based on sex. So at issue here, the families say that the Tennessee law amounts to unconstitutional sex discrimination and a broad restriction on treatments that nearly every major medical association has said here in the U.S. are appropriate and effective for minors. And on the other end, you have Tennessee arguing here that states have long had the power to regulate medicine, and there is nothing unconstitutional about restricting the use of a drug for certain purposes, even when it can be used for treating other conditions. Again, here, Tennessee arguing that there should be no limits on imposing age limits for health treatments when the risks and rewards are too uncertain. So that ultimately here is going to be the nature of the Supreme Court decision. It'll come out likely when the big decisions come out at the end of June next year, early July. The state arguing here that both men and women would be denied such care, so there is no discrimination here based on sex. Just in terms of numbers here, the last year we have numbers for in 2021, 42,000 Americans under the age of 18 were diagnosed with what's called gender dysphoria. That is triple the number from just 2017. The data shows that the vast majority of them were not prescribed hormones or puberty blockers. Still, you are seeing this increase in the number of gender dysphoria diagnoses here. So this is becoming super relevant, has been part of the culture wars. And you have actually, beyond Tennessee, Jill, nearly half the union, 23 states, 23 other states, have similar laws to Tennessee. So there are broad implications here for how the Supreme Court makes this decision. It could determine the outcome of dozens of other lawsuits around the rights of transgender people, including sports teams, bathroom use, etc. It depends on how wide they go or how narrow they go with the decision here. And so this will be one of, you could say, top 3 or 5 decisions we will be looking for at the end of the year. We will watch the arguments over on the Instagram account today and bring you the latest over there.
All right, time for the speed read from the New York Times. President Biden arrived in Angola on Monday for the only visit to Sub-Saharan Africa of his presidency and perhaps his last overseas trip before he leaves office. But the journey was overshadowed by his decision to pardon his son of tax and gun convictions. He had hoped to draw attention to his commitment to Africa at a time when the United States is in competition on the continent with China. But all of the focus is on his full and unconditional pardon for Hunter Biden, his 54-year-old son, despite repeated promises not to do so. As we reported yesterday, Republicans and even some Democrats have been really critical of the decision. Biden did not speak to the reporters traveling with him. He left that to White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, who answered questions about whether the president lied when he said that he would not pardon his son.
She always gets the short end of the stick there.
I guess that's the gig, right?
That's the gig. When you're White House press secretary, they're like, the president's decided X. You figure out how to explain it.
So here is her explanation. She told reporters that Biden didn't actually make the decision to pardon his son until this weekend. Remember, there was some reporting from NBC News that he had always planned to pardon his son, but for political reasons decided to say that he was not going to. So here is the press secretary.
He came to this decision this weekend. So let's be very clear about that. He says it himself. It's in his voice. He said he came to this decision this weekend. And he said he wrestled with this. And because he believes in the justice system, but he also believes that the war politics infected the process and led to a miscarriage of justice.
Moshe, I'm not quite sure if that's going to quell the criticism, but we appreciate it.
I'm pretty sure it won't. Jill. In fact, what's interesting about all of this, and this was a concern among now the dozens of Democratic leaders that have come out here opposed to Biden's decision, including, we should note, 2028 aspiring candidate Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, late on Tuesday said that I don't approve. This is Gavin Newsom here, of President Biden's decision. So even he sees the political writing here as he looks to a presidential run himself in just a few years. Among other folks who watch this very closely, well, President-elect Trump and his legal team, who made a filing in court this week, quoting from the Biden pardon. They're urging the judge in New York who presided over his conviction for falsifying business records. They're looking to dismiss the indictment. This was the Stormy Daniels-related hush money case. They said President Biden has made the argument for us. In their filing, they write, yesterday in issuing a 10-year pardon to Hunter Biden that covers any and all crimes, whether charged or uncharged, President Biden asserted that his son was selectively and unfairly prosecuted and treated differently. This is the filing by the Trump attorneys. It goes on. President Biden argued that raw politics has infected this process and led to a miscarriage of justice. These comments amounted to an extraordinary condemnation of President Biden's own DOJ. They argue that Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, has engaged in precisely this type of political theater that President Biden condemned himself. So the Trump team saying, well, Biden says there's a problem with DOJ. You should probably overturn our conviction here for President-elect Trump. So we'll see how that rolls with the judge. We already don't expect the sentencing for at least 4 years. Now, whether the judge actually buys this argument and overturns the entire conviction remains to be seen. Still fascinating in terms of the implications here. Again, the Trump team saying, yeah, Biden's making the argument for us and agreeing with us that the DOJ is unfair in how it prosecutes things. That was an argument they made in the hush money case, that the way that the law was stretched, 8 years later, stretched from misdemeanor to felony here, wouldn't have been done for anybody else, but was done specifically because his name is Trump, in the same way that Biden argues that Hunter Biden was treated unfairly because his name is Biden. Another person who's paid attention to all of this, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who faces federal indictment and potentially years in prison for corruption and other matters. He was asked about it. There's a photo of him holding up the New York Times front page headline, smiling. He read from it at a press conference. This is Eric Adams now, the New York City mayor. So Eric Adams reading from the newspaper, a line from the Times that says, President Biden and President-elect Trump now agree on one thing. The Biden Justice Department has been politicized. And then Eric Adams says, does that sound familiar? I rest my case. Eric Adams now saying, well, Biden's saying it, then my federal indictment is also BS here. And this is the big concern Democrats had, in particular those Democrats who are criticizing Biden, is that by going after the Justice Department, which he didn't need to do in his statement, but he did go there in the Hunter Biden statement, that he opens the door as the president, sitting president of the United States, to everyone being like, well, the president said that the Justice Department is politicized, so my federal indictment is not legitimate. Eric Adams, by the way, hoping that Trump pardons him, because Eric Adams has been, let's say, among Democrats out there, much friendlier to Donald Trump than most others.
All right, from Bloomberg, we're learning this week that U.S. telecommunications companies are still working to kick out state-sponsored Chinese hackers who breached their networks. Lawmakers call it one of the worst cyber espionage incidents in U.S. history. It is part of a spying campaign that dates back months, according to U.S. officials. The hacking group is known as Salt Typhoon. It compromised multiple telecoms, collecting intelligence and targeting the phones belonging to President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, among others. The attackers also spied on communications belonging to what the FBI has said is a limited number of people in government and politics. One government official telling reporters on Tuesday, quote, we are still figuring out just how deeply and where they have penetrated. So until we have a complete picture, it's hard to know the exact parameters of how to kick them off. The translation, Moshe, the hackers are still in the telecommunication systems and there is no timeline on when they're going to be out.
Yeah, and they won't name them explicitly, but it's been reported pretty widely that among the companies are ones you might be familiar with, AT&T, Verizon. Now, T-Mobile says that it was able to confront the attack and not be infiltrated mostly. So that's T-Mobile's statement. And it goes beyond the U.S. You have New Zealand, Canada, Australia, all putting out similar warnings here about the Chinese hack in the last day or so. The FBI began investigating activity earlier this year, noting that hackers had stolen large amounts of records regarding when, where, and who individuals were communicating with. Officials said that the hackers also copied information related to law enforcement requests and court orders. According to the Washington Post, the hackers were able to penetrate some of the carrier's portals that law enforcement uses to submit court orders for monitoring specific telephone numbers. So essentially here, this would allow the Chinese to know what Chinese operatives or projects are being scrutinized by U.S. law enforcement. They eavesdropped on a number of government and political targets here in this case. They were paying attention to what was being published in the U.S., either by the government, the media, regarding the hacking campaign. So the Chinese really immersed in the system here. One warning they've put out to everyone, especially government employees, is to use encrypted services for their phone calls and text messages. So we're talking about things like Signal or Telegram or WhatsApp for phone calls and messaging, especially since they don't have a timeline right now, the FBI doesn't, in terms of how long it'll take to get Salt Typhoon, again, the name of the hacking group, out of the networks.
From People, Kate Middleton made a rare public appearance as she recovers from her cancer treatment. She and Prince William kicked off a day of royal pageantry as the first royals to meet the Amir of the state of Qatar and his wife on Tuesday. And then they accompanied the couple to the Horse Guards Parade for a ceremonial welcome, including a greeting from King Charles. Missing from that early event in the visit was Queen Camilla, who has been struggling with the lingering effects of a chest infection. The Princess of Wales has been out of the royal spotlight for much of 2024 after announcing in March that she was undergoing treatment for cancer.
Back in September, Kate announced that she was relieved to have completed her chemotherapy. She has joined the royals for a number of events over the course of the fall. And she and William, along with the kids, will be involved in Christmas carol services and activities over at Westminster Abbey. That visit from the Qatari leaders to England, not going without controversy, though. A number of human rights organizations say that they're appalled by the human rights abuses and the treatment of LGBT community and migrant workers in Qatar. Qatar, of course, has also been scrutinized of late for allowing Hamas leaders to stay in the country. And so that's part of the discussion there. We should note, though, that the Qatari leader actually happened to be educated in Britain, including graduating from the Sandhurst Military Academy. So that was a bit of the discussion there at the state dinner last night.
Some business news from CNBC. Frontier Airlines, one of the world's biggest budget airlines, is adding first-class seats. Its change in strategy comes as the industry is battling for customers who are willing to splurge on more personal space. Starting in September, Frontier plans to start ripping out the first two rows of its 3x3 economy seats to add 4 first-class seats in a 2x2 configuration. The Denver-based airline's also revamping its loyalty program to offer complimentary seat upgrades to its gold level members and above, and a free companion ticket for its higher tier platinum and diamond level members. In mid-2025, customers will be able to redeem their miles for seating upgrades and baggage fees. The CEO said the company's biggest gaps in its revenue come from not offering first-class seats and not having enough rewards for its loyalty program members. So he thinks this is going to be a game changer. He said he expects the new seats will be especially popular on some of their cross-country flights.
Yeah, where you need that extra leg room or you're of a certain height and need to stretch there. We should note business-wise, typically airlines break even on coach and then make their money on every flight based on business and first class. So Frontier and some of these budget airlines have really been hurting themselves because, again, the typical approach here is you make your profit off of the basically first few rows of the plane and you break even on the rest of us in the back of the plane. And so there have been more upgrades of late for Delta, United, JetBlue, also looking at continuing to grow spacious options here. Southwest Airlines is planning to add extra legroom seats, introduce seat assignments that increase revenue here. Again, that's a shift for Southwest. Spirit Airlines, which is currently going through Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection and sort of the reallocation of their funds, is rolling out what they call the Big Front Seat. It's basically another way of saying first class, but they call it the big front seat over on Spirit.
It does feel like first class is one of those terms that might not be used in a couple of years.
Well, it implies that the rest of us are second class.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. We're coach, Moshe. That's fine.
Coach.
All right, some music news from Billboard. Beyonce can now add another title to her list of accolades. She was just named the greatest pop star of the 21st century by Billboard. The magazine's been gradually unveiling its rankings over the last several months, and on Tuesday announced that Queen Bee secured the #1 spot on its list of 25 greatest pop stars. Billboard saying, since last August, we have been rolling out our picks for the artists who have most defined pop stardom for the last 25 years. The reasons why Beyonce captured the top spot on our list were beyond numerous, ranging from her 25 years of timeless albums and singles to her incalculable industry impact and influence on other artists to her peerless raw talents as a singer and performer. They write that she was still a teenager managed by her father when Say My Name hit #1. And then she was a 42-year-old married mother of 3 by the time Texas Hold'em got there. And in between the two, there were precisely 0 moments, they say, in which Beyonce was not Beyonce.
Wait, hold on. What does that mean?
In their words, Moshe, they say there were no flop eras for Beyonce, no periods where she disappeared for half a decade, no clear missteps that were not immediately and emphatically course corrected.
Flawlessness. They argue flawlessness from Queen Bee.
So basically, they say her closest peers this century are not other pop stars. They're LeBron James and Serena Williams. That's how good she is.
All right. So Billboard here ranking the best artists of this century. Here, we're only 25 years into the 100 years of this century. Queen Bee, #1. Taylor Swift, #2. Rihanna, 3. Drake, 4. Gaga, 5. Britney Spears, 6. Hubby, Jay-Z, coming in at #16 on the Billboard list here.
I'm thinking, who's Hubby? Is that like a singer I've never heard of?
Hubby. I mean, there might be one named Hubby. I feel like I'm like my parents now. Like, oh, her hubby, Jay-Z, trying to bring it to the youth, the younger generation here. Now, we're in the year 2024 heading to 2025, meaning we got 75 years left of the century. And I was trying to look back. I was like, if Billboard magazine, and they didn't do this, I don't think they existed yet, in 1924 had said, let's name the best artists of the 20th century. In 1924, the following people would not have been born yet: Elvis, the Beatles, Sinatra, Michael Jackson, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, even Billie Holiday would have only been 10 years old in 1925. So, so who could we have named the best artist of the 20th century in the first 25 years, having now acknowledged all the great artists that were born after the first 25 years of that century? I guess you have like George Gershwin and Cole Porter, perhaps. Do you consider Scott Joplin, the pianist who was born in the late 19th century and died in the early 20th century? Does he make that list? It's just, listen, I know Billboard's trying to sell magazines and get some folks in there, and people love lists. But does it feel a bit premature? Will they have to go back every couple decades and be like, okay, updating now, Beyonce has fallen to 5th because there's a bunch of people who haven't been born yet. There's going to be some real tunes in the 2050s and 2060s, Jill. Stay tuned.
By comparison, Moshe, we're all about to get our Spotify Wrapped lists, which is the songs and albums and podcasts that we've listened to the most in 2024. It would be like putting that out in March, at the end of March, just being like, here's where you are. You're the most, where you listen to the most in 2024.
Well, depending on who you are, that might stay consistent all year long.
Well, mine is clearly going to be Taylor Swift, which was what it was last year.
Right. Not to take anything away from Rihanna, Drake, Taylor Swift. It will be really interesting when we do our podcast in the 2080s, Jill, as we head in, as we head into doing this podcast for, the 60th year, where the rankings, put a note for ourselves in the Google Doc to come back at this in about 40, 50 years. All right. Speaking of history, context, we end, of course, with our On This Day segment. On this day in 1791, the world's first Sunday newspaper, The Observer, was published in Britain. So happy birthday to The Observer. On this day in 1954, fast food news, the first Burger King opened in Miami, selling a hamburger and a milkshake for 18 cents. Now, that's a deal. As of today, Burger King has 20,000 locations in 100 countries. It is going to be celebrating its 70th birthday today with special deals and a birthday pie dessert. So if you're a Burger King fan, even if you're not and you want to try it, go check them out today. They got some deals for their big 7-0. Sticking with some music history here, Jill, on this day in 1969, Jay-Z was born. He turns 55 years old today.
Hubby?
Yes. Otherwise known as Hubby, born Sean Carter, Jay-Z, rapper, businessman, record executive, multi-billionaire. Happy birthday. And one more item here in music history. On this day in 1980, Led Zeppelin disbanded. The British rock band announced on this day 44 years ago that it was disbanding after 12 years after the death of their drummer.
Okay, Moshe, that is a wrap. Thank you guys for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And review us in the App Store. We do appreciate it.
The reviews matter, so if you can take a second over in your Apple podcast app and leave us a review, we greatly appreciate it. It helps us in the rankings there. Otherwise, we'll see you back here tomorrow.